There is a Yoruba saying, "The child who has no mother eats whatever the stepmother decides." Emeka Chukwuemeka Obira had heard that proverb as a boy and believed it was exaggeration, the kind of dark folklore old women used to frighten young men out of second marriages. He had been wrong. He discovered the truth not from a neighbor, not from a school report, not from a social worker. He discovered it on a Thursday evening when he walked through his own front door 3 weeks ahead of schedule, still wearing his business jacket from the boardrooms of New York, luggage in hand, and found his daughter Titi sitting cross-legged on the cold kitchen floor, eating cold eba from a cracked plastic bowl, while his wife Shade sat at the dining table finishing her own hot meal in perfect peace. But to understand how a man of Emeka's intelligence and love could have missed what was happening inside his own home, you must first understand the kind of man he was, and the kind of loss that had broken him open wide enough for the wrong woman to walk through. Emeka Obira was 44 years old, the founder and chairman of Obira Holdings, a Lagos-based conglomerate with interests in real estate, oil servicing, and digital infrastructure that stretched from Victoria Island to the trading floors of New York. He lived in a mansion in Lekki Phase 1, a 6-bedroom property behind high white walls with a compound large enough to contain the dreams of 10 ordinary families. He had a driver. He had house staff. He had everything that money in Lagos could buy. What money could not buy back was Adiz. Adiz Obira, née Nwasu, had been his wife for 9 years, the kind of wife men write songs about and other men quietly envy. She had been warm, sharp, funny in 3 languages, and so thoroughly present in her love that the house had felt lit from the inside whenever she was in it. She had given him Titi, their daughter, born in 2017, a child with Adiz's exact cheekbones and her grandfather's stubborn eyes. In March 2021, on the Lekki Expressway, a truck with failed brakes had ended everything in 4 seconds. Adiz had been driving home from a board meeting. The truck hit the driver's side. She did not survive the hour. Emeka had worn black for a year. He had sat in the empty bedroom and smelled her wrapper for months after the funeral. He had raised Titi alone with the help of house staff and his mother, who traveled from Anambra to Lagos and stayed for 8 months without being asked. He had functioned, but only barely, and only for Titi's sake. It was his mother who had first suggested he remarry. Not for himself, she had said carefully, but for the child. A girl of 4 needed a mother's hands. Emeka had resisted for 2 years. Then he had met Shade. Shade Ademi had appeared at a charity dinner in Ikoyi, breathtaking in a deep green asoebi, smooth, dark skin, natural hair pinned elegantly, a laugh that filled the room without demanding it. She had been introduced to him by a mutual friend, a pastor's wife who had spoken of Shade in the language of godly women, patient, nurturing, grounded. Shade had met Titi twice before the engagement and had been so tender with the child that Emeka had felt, for the first time since the accident, something loosen in his chest. He had been a fool. They married in December 2022. The wedding was the event of the Lagos social calendar, 400 guests, a soebi in burgundy and gold, a reception at Eco Hotel that lasted until 2 in the morning. Shade had danced. She had cried during the vows. She had held Titi's hand during the photographs and smiled for every camera like a woman who had been given a gift she intended to cherish. The mask had lasted exactly 3 weeks. The first sign was small. Titi mentioned to the housemaid, Mama Ngozi, that Auntie Shade had not given her dinner because she had been rude. Mama Ngozi had fed the child quietly and said nothing to Emeka, not wanting to cause trouble in a new marriage. The second sign was a bruise on Titi's upper arm that Titi explained when pressed as a fall from the garden steps. Emeka had believed her. He had been distracted. A major New York deal was consuming his attention, and Shade had been, as always, perfectly composed whenever he was home. By the time Emeka left for New York in January 2024, for what was supposed to be a 6-week business trip, Shade had had 14 months to perfect her system. She knew the house staff's schedules. She knew which of them were loyal to her and which were loyal to the memory of Adiz. She knew exactly how long Emeka's calls lasted and when he was in meetings. She had built, inside the beautiful mansion in Lekki, a second world, a private world of cruelty so methodical it had its own architecture. In that world, Tati did not eat at the dining table. In that world, Tati wore the oldest clothes while Shade's biological nieces, who visited on weekends, wore new ones bought with Emeka's credit card. In that world, Tati was referred to, when Shade was certain no staff member was listening, not by her name, but as that woman's child. And in that world, the cracked plastic bowl that had once belonged to Rex, the compound's old Alsatian dog who had died the previous year, had been quietly moved from the yard to the kitchen cabinet, and assigned to a 6-year-old girl who had done nothing in her short life except be born to the wrong mother at the wrong time. On the Thursday evening that Emeka walked through the door from New York 3 weeks early, his deal closed faster than expected, his heart suddenly impatient to see his daughter. He did not find the house that Shade had carefully arranged for his visits. He found the house as it actually was. And standing in his own kitchen doorway, briefcase in hand, still in his New York business suit, Emeka Obura looked at his daughter on the floor and felt the ground beneath his expensive shoes turn to water. Shade spent 14 months building a perfect lie, and it took one unannounced Thursday evening to begin unraveling everything. Tati never told her father. The staff stayed silent. And Emeka, blinded by grief and trust, never saw it coming. But now, he is standing in that kitchen doorway. The question is, what does a billionaire father do when he realizes the woman he married to protect his daughter has been her greatest threat? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. If this story already has your heart, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Next chapter is where Emeka's calm shatters completely. Tati Obura was 6 years old and had already learned the most dangerous lesson a child can learn, that some pain is better kept inside. She had not always been this way. Before Auntie Shade, before the bowl, before the careful choreography of cruelty that had reshaped her small world, Tati had been the kind of child who narrated everything. She told stories at the dinner table. She brought her drawings to whoever was nearest and explained each one with the seriousness of a curator. She asked questions that made adults laugh and then think. She had been in the language of the house staff who loved her, a child full of light. That child was still inside her, but she had learned to keep her light very small when Auntie Shade was in the room. On the Thursday evening that her father walked through the kitchen door, Tati had been sitting on the cold tiles for 40 minutes. Shade had gone to her bedroom to take a phone call, one of the long laughing ones that she took with the door closed whenever Emeka was away. The kitchen smelled of the jollof rice and peppered chicken that Shade had just finished eating at the dining table. The smell had drifted to Tati on the floor, and she had concentrated very hard on her cold eba, willing herself not to notice it. She heard the front door. She did not move immediately because front doors opened for many reasons, deliveries, the generator technician, Shade returning from one of her outings. It was the particular weight of the footsteps that made her look up. She knew her father's footsteps the way she knew her own heartbeat. Heavy, even, unhurried, the walk of a man who owned wherever he was standing. He appeared in the kitchen doorway and stopped. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the billionaire in his New York suit and the small girl on the floor with the cracked bowl in her hands. Tati watched his face move through expressions she could not fully name. She saw him look at her. She saw him look at the bowl. She saw him look at the dining table where Shade's cleared plate still sat. She saw him look back at her. She said the only thing she could think to say, "Daddy, you came back." He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and knelt on the tiles in his expensive trousers, right there on the floor beside her, and took the bowl from her hands very gently. The way you take something sharp from a child. He looked at it. He turned it over. He saw the crack running down the center. He saw the faded lettering on the underside that Shade had not thought to scrape off, Rex, written in black marker in Emeka's own handwriting from the year he had bought the dog a matching set of feeding bowls. He read his dead dog's name on the bowl his living daughter had been eating from. The sound he made was not a word. It was something underneath language. "Tati," he said when he could speak. His voice was very controlled, the voice of a man holding something enormous very carefully. "How long?" She looked at her hands. "Daddy." "Tati," He tilted her chin up gently with one finger. Look at me. How long has this been your bowl? She counted in the way children count, not in months but in events. Since before her birthday, since before Christmas, since the time Auntie Shade's sister visited and Tati had been told to eat in her room for the whole week so the guests would not have to see her at the table. A long time, she said finally, since the Harmattan. The Harmattan, 8 months ago. Emeka set the bowl on the floor beside him very carefully, as though setting down a piece of evidence at a crime scene, which, he was beginning to understand, was exactly what it was. Does she, he stopped, restarted. What else, Tati? Tell Daddy everything, you will not be in trouble. I promise you on Mummy's name you will not be in trouble. On Mummy's name. Tati knew what that meant. Her father had only ever sworn on her late mother's name once before, the time he had promised her that the hospital would not hurt, when she had been terrified of an injection at age 4. He had been telling the truth that time. She began to talk. It came out slowly at first, the way water comes from a tap that has been closed too long, in fits, in stops, in the careful edited version that children produce when they are still afraid. Then it came faster. The bowl. The meals she was denied when she misbehaved, and misbehavior, she explained with devastating 6-year-old precision, meant things like asking for a second cup of water or leaving a light on in her room. The names Shade called her when no staff was present. That woman's child. Bad luck child. The reason this house cannot move forward. The time Shade had twisted her arm behind her back for accidentally spilling a cup of juice on the sitting room rug, and told her that if she told her father, Shade would send her to boarding school so far away that Daddy would forget she existed. Emeka listened to everything. He did not interrupt. He did not cry, not in front of her. His face had gone to a place beyond ordinary expression, to the particular stillness of a man who is making decisions that cannot be undone. When she finished, he gathered her into his arms and held her against his New York business suit and said into her hair, quietly and with complete certainty, I am here now. Nobody will ever touch you again. This I swear. Upstairs, Shade's phone call was ending. They could hear her footsteps crossing the bedroom floor, the light, quick steps of a woman about to come downstairs, unaware that the world she had constructed so carefully was already, quietly, on fire. Shade Adami, Obera had spent 2 years perfecting the performance of her life. She had studied Emeka the way an actor studies a role, his preferences, his triggers, his blind spots, the particular combination of grace and warmth and spiritual language that made him lower his guard. She had learned that he responded to gentleness the way a man scarred by sudden loss responds, with almost pathetic gratitude, with the eagerness of someone who had stopped believing softness was available to him. She had deployed that knowledge with surgical precision. She came down the stairs in a pale yellow kaftan, phone in hand, hair freshly wrapped in a matching headtie, and she was already composing her face into the warm wifely expression she wore for Emeka's returns. The slightly surprised delight, the movement toward him with open arms, the NNA, you did not tell me you were coming, that she had delivered so many times it no longer required conscious effort. She was 3 steps from the bottom of the staircase when she saw him standing in the kitchen doorway. She recalibrated instantly. 2 years of practice made this automatic. The surprise became more genuine, the smile widened. She accelerated her movement toward him with arms extending. Emeka, NNAU. Stop. One word, flat as a stone dropped on concrete, Shade stopped. She had never heard that particular tone from him before. In 2 years of marriage, she had heard him angry, the controlled boardroom anger of a man who had learned to monetize his composure. She had heard him sad. In the private grieving moments, she had pretended to comfort while privately resenting. She had heard him laugh and negotiate and pray and reprimand his staff. She had never heard him sound like this. She looked past him into the kitchen. Tati was standing behind her father, one small hand gripping the back of his jacket. The cracked plastic bowl was on the kitchen counter. Shade's eyes went to the bowl and then back to Emeka's face, and in that single movement, she understood that the architecture of 2 years had just collapsed. But Shade was not, at her core, a woman who collapsed easily. She had built too much on survival instinct. Even now, even with the bowl on the counter and Tati's red eyes visible behind Emeka's arm, she reached for the scaffolding of performance. Emeka, whatever Tati told you, she has been. She has been what? His voice was still quiet. That quietness was more frightening than shouting. Choose your next word very carefully, Shade, because I am standing in my own kitchen holding the bowl I used to feed my dead dog, the bowl that my daughter has been eating from for 8 months, and I need you to choose your very next word like your life depends on it. Shade's mouth closed. Sit down, he said. She sat in the chair at the head of the dining table where her cleared plate still sat. The symbolism was not lost on either of them. She had just eaten a full hot meal while his daughter sat on the floor below her. What followed was not a shouting match. Emeka was not a man who shouted. What it was instead was a dismantling, slow, precise, and absolute. He listed what Tati had told him, not with emotion but with the clinical detail of a man presenting a case. The bowl, the denied meals, the twisted arm, the threats about boarding school, the names that woman's child, bad luck child, spoken to a 6-year-old girl who had never done a single thing to deserve them except exist. With each item, he watched Shade's face. She tried 3 approaches in rapid succession: denial, minimization, and then, when neither worked against his terrible calm, tears. Real tears, or close enough to real that on any other occasion they might have worked. She spoke about the pressure of being a stepmother. She spoke about Tati's behavior, which she described as difficult. She reached desperately, finally, for the language she had always known moved him most, the spiritual language, speaking about spiritual attack and misunderstanding, and how the enemy was trying to destroy their home. Emeka listened to all of it without expression. When she finished, he stood up and called Mama Ngozi, the senior housemaid, into the room. Mama Ngozi entered with the face of a woman who had been waiting for this day and was both relieved and terrified that it had arrived. Emeka asked her one question: "What have you seen in this house?" Mama Ngozi looked at Shade. Then she looked at Tati. Then she took a breath and told the truth, all of it, everything she had witnessed and stayed silent about and prayed someone else would report first. The bowl, the punishments, the day Shade had locked Tati in the storage room for 2 hours for singing too loudly. The way Shade's demeanor changed within minutes of Emeka's car leaving the compound gate. Shade stood up. "You are lying." "Sit down." Emeka's voice had not risen a single decibel. It did not need to. Shade sat down. He turned to Mama Ngozi. "Take Tati upstairs. Give her a proper meal, the best in this house, and stay with her until I call you." Mama Ngozi took Tati's hand. As they passed Shade's chair, Tati did not look at her stepmother. She had learned in 8 months to make herself invisible in Shade's presence. Old habit. It would take time to unlearn. When they were gone, Emeka sat across from his wife in the silent dining room. "I want you to listen to me very carefully," he said, "because I am only going to say this once." Shade tried denial. She tried tears. She tried spiritual language. And Emeka sat through all of it without blinking, because a man who has heard his 6-year-old daughter describe 8 months of cruelty cannot be moved by a performance. Mama Ngozi told the truth. Tati has been taken upstairs, and now Emeka is about to say something he will only say once. What do you think those words are? Comment below. This is the scene everyone is talking about. Share this story right now. Subscribe and ring that bell. Next chapter is where Shade's world begins to fall apart, publicly, completely, and permanently. When the music changes, so does the dance, and those who cannot change fall. The words Emeka spoke to Shade in that dining room lasted 11 minutes. He knew this because he had looked at his watch when he began and again when he finished, a habit from years of boardroom negotiations, where time was always money. In 11 minutes, he told her everything that was going to happen next, in the same measured sequence with which he would have presented a corporate restructuring plan. He was not cruel. He was not theatrical. He was simply a man who had made decisions and was communicating them. When he finished, Shade's face had gone through colors he had never seen on it before. The calls began that same night. Emeka was a methodical man. He did not move on instinct alone. He moved on evidence, documentation, and witnesses. Within 48 hours of his return, he had spoken privately with every member of the house staff. The driver, who had once seen Shade slap Tati's hand at the car door and warned her to stop acting like your mother. The cook, who had been instructed to serve Tati smaller portions. The gateman, who had twice heard Tati crying behind the storage room door and had done nothing because he feared losing his job. Each account was worse than the last. He called his lawyer, Barrister Akaffer, a sharp Enugu man who had handled the Obera Holdings legal affairs for 11 years. He laid out everything calmly and asked what was needed. Barrister Akaffer told him. Emeka provided it. The machinery of consequence, once engaged by a man of Emeka's resources, moved with a speed that ordinary life rarely matched. But the part of the unraveling that Emeka had not orchestrated, the part that announced itself without his direction and spread further than his legal documents could reach, began with a phone call that Shade herself made. On the second night after Emeka's return, while they were still under the same roof in separate rooms, and the atmosphere in the mansion was the particular cold of a marriage in its final hours, Shade called her elder sister Biodun. She called her because she needed an ally, a voice, someone to stand beside her against what she could feel coming. She told Biodun her version, edited, softened, repositioned as a story of misunderstanding and a difficult stepchild, and a husband who had turned against her without cause. Biodun listened. Then Biodun asked one question. Shade, did the child eat from the dog's bowl? Shade said nothing for 3 seconds too long. Biodun ended the call. By morning, Biodun had called their mother, Mama Ademi, a 70-year-old woman from Ibadan who had raised 6 children with a discipline rooted in the belief that a woman's dignity was built entirely on how she treated those weaker than herself. Mama Ademi called Shade directly. The conversation lasted 4 minutes and ended with Mama Ademi saying in Yoruba, words that translated to something close to, "You have disgraced the blood that made you." Then Mama Ademi called Emeka. She did not call to defend her daughter. She called to apologize on behalf of a family that had produced something she did not recognize. She wept on the phone, genuinely, without strategy, and asked about Tati in the voice of a woman confronting the worst of herself through the worst of her child. Emeka was gracious. He was always gracious with elders. But graciousness, he had decided, had nothing to do with what was going to happen next. The Lagos social world in which Shade had built her reputation was not a large one. It was, in fact, a compound, a place of walls and gates, and everybody knowing exactly whose generator was running. Within a week of Emeka's return, the story had moved through it with the unstoppable momentum of a true thing. The pastor's wife who had introduced them, the same woman who had described Shade as patient, nurturing, grounded, called Emeka in a state of horrified distress. The women from Shade's church circle began a strange migration away from her messages. The charity committee she sat on sent a quiet email about pausing her membership pending clarification. Shade watched her world contract in real time. She had spent 2 years constructing a public self of such careful virtue that she had begun, somewhere along the way, to half believe it herself. Now she discovered what happens when the construction is exposed, not gradually, not privately, but all at once, in the merciless light of a community that had admired her and now felt personally deceived. Her friends did not call to support her. They called briefly, uncomfortably, to distance themselves. The language they used was the language of people protecting their own reputations by association. I had no idea. She seemed so different to me. I cannot be connected to something like this. On the 7th day after Emeka's return, a removal truck arrived at the Lekki mansion at 9 in the morning. Shade's personal belongings had been packed by the house staff under Barrister Akaffer's supervision. Her clothes, her jewelry, her cosmetics, her carefully accumulated pieces of the life she had married into. They were loaded efficiently and without ceremony into the truck. Shade stood in the compound in a pale blue wrapper, watching. Her sister Biodun had come not to help her resist, but to take her away. Biodun's face was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was ashamed. Emeka stood at the front door of his house with Tati beside him, his hand on her shoulder. He did not speak to Shade. He had said everything he needed to say 11 minutes after he found his daughter on the kitchen floor. There was nothing left to add. Shade looked once at Tati. Tati looked back at her with the eyes of a child who had survived something and knew it. The truck pulled out of the compound gate. And Shade Adami, who had arrived in this house as a bride in burgundy and gold with 400 witnesses to her performance, left it on a Tuesday morning with a removal truck and a sister who could not look her in the face. The bed you make with your own hands is the bed you sleep in, every night for the rest of your life. There is a particular kind of consequence that does not arrive all at once. It does not come like a truck on a highway, sudden and total. It comes the way harmattan comes, gradually, daily, a slow dryness that gets into everything and does not leave. It comes in the morning when you wake and remember. It comes in the silences of people who used to fill your life with noise. It comes in the mirror, in the market, in the church pew where you used to sit in the front row and now cannot bring yourself to enter at all. This was the consequence that found Shade Adami. She moved, after leaving the Lecky mansion, into her elder sister Bio Dunn's apartment in Gbagada, a 2-bedroom flat that had not been designed for 2 adult women with the weight of what lay between them. Bio Dunn did not throw her out. Bio Dunn was not that kind of woman. But she was also not the kind of woman who pretended. And so the apartment became a place of careful silences and meals eaten separately, and a kind of daily low-grade grief that was worse, in many ways, than open conflict. Mama Adami came from Ibadan 1 month after the separation. She sat in Bio Dunn's sitting room in her Sunday wrapper on a Wednesday afternoon and looked at Shade for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "I did not carry you for 9 months and wash your body and pray over your school books so that you could feed a child from a dog's bowl. I do not know who you became, but she is not my daughter." She stayed for 3 days. She cooked. She prayed long, private prayers behind the closed guest room door that both sisters could hear through the wall. When she left, she embraced Bio Dunn at the door. She looked at Shade from a distance and nodded once, not in forgiveness, not yet, perhaps not for a very long time. In acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a mother who had not stopped loving her child but had stopped recognizing her. Shade's social world, which had been contracting since the week of her departure, completed its contraction over the following months. The church she had attended, the large, well-photographed congregation in Victoria Island, where she had been a visible and admired member, became impossible. She attended once after the separation and felt the geometry of the room rearrange itself around her presence. People did not ignore her ostentatiously. They simply became slightly occupied whenever she moved toward them. She did not go back. The charity work stopped. The lunch invitations dried up. The WhatsApp groups, those precise social instruments of Lagos women's belonging, went quiet around her name, and then, one by one, she noticed she had been removed from them. Not blocked, removed. The Lagos way of saying, "You are no longer one of us." She got a job. Not a grand one, an administrative position in a small company on the mainland, far from the circuits of power and visibility she had once moved through on Emeka's name. She woke at 6 every morning, commuted in traffic, ate her lunch alone, commuted back. It was the life of an ordinary woman, and for a woman who had oriented her entire existence around being extraordinary by proximity, it was its own form of daily reckoning. She thought about Tati. This was the part she had not expected, that the child would occupy so much space in her mind. Not with guilt at first, with something uglier, the residue of her old hatred still trying to justify itself. She would find herself, in weak moments, rehearsing the arguments she had made to herself during those 2 years, that the child was a reminder, an obstacle, a ghost. That what she had done was a form of discipline. That other women in her position would have done the same. But the arguments grew thinner every time she rehearsed them. And in their thinning she discovered, to her discomfort, what had always been on the other side of them. A 6-year-old child on a cold kitchen floor with a dead dog's bowl in her hands, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, having learned at 6 years old that she was worth nothing. That image did not leave. Meanwhile, in the Lecky mansion, Tati Obera was learning new things. She was learning that dinner happened at the dining table every evening, and that her chair was the one directly beside her father's, and that nobody monitored how many times she asked for water. She was learning that she could sing in any room of the house and nobody would twist her arm. She was learning, slowly and with the particular caution of a child who has been hurt, that the new housekeeper her father had hired, a warm, older woman named Mama Bose, would always have food ready for her and would sometimes call her my small madam in a voice that held no malice. She was seeing a child therapist twice a week, a calm woman named Dr. Alamide who had an office in Ikoyi full of soft toys and colored pencils, and who never pressed Titi to talk faster than she was ready to. Progress was not linear. There were nights when Titi woke crying. There were days when she carried herself with a smallness that broke Emeka's heart. But there were also days, more of them as the months passed, when the light that the house staff remembered from before came back into her face and stayed there for hours at a time. Emeka had not remarried. He did not speak about whether he would. He had hired a full-time nanny of exceptional character, vetted with a thoroughness that Barrister Ackhafer had described as unprecedented even by your standards. He worked his deals and ran his companies and came home every evening to eat dinner beside his daughter and hear about her day. He had made one change to the house that nobody had asked him to make. He had repainted Titi's bedroom, the pale yellow walls that she shared with the memory of her suffering, a bright, warm coral that Titi had chosen herself from a color chart, pointing at it with the focused authority of a child reclaiming something. The dog bowl he had placed in a box and kept in his study, not as a relic of pain, as a reminder to himself of what trust given without vigilance can cost. And far away in a Gbagado apartment, on an ordinary Wednesday evening, Shade Adami sat with the life she had made and felt, settling into her bones with the permanence of harmattan dust, the full and undiminishable weight of everything she had chosen. Shade did not go to prison. She did not make headlines. There was no dramatic courtroom, no public shamming ceremony. Her punishment was quieter and more permanent than any of that. It was the slow daily weight of a life emptied of everything she had valued, built with her own choices, slept in every night without escape. Titi got her coral bedroom. She got her dinner chair. She got her voice back, slowly, carefully, one therapy session and one sung song at a time. And Emeka kept the bowl in his study, not for bitterness, for wisdom. That is the African way. That is the human way. Justice does not always arrive loudly, but it always arrives. If this story moved something in you, share it right now. Not tomorrow, right now. Subscribe to never miss a story like this one. Hit the notification bell. New stories every single week. Comment below. What moment in this story broke your heart the most? We tell these stories because somewhere right now, there is a Titi eating alone on a cold floor, and she needs the world to see her. Share this story and make sure she is seen. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. We will see you in the next story.